or even sometimes, and this one's more sensitive and controversial, but even sometimes our relationship to psychiatric medications that is sometimes creating a vibration and a density that's blocking us from the healing that can come in.
Hello and welcome to Medicine Wisdom. I'm Lena Franklin, modern medicine woman, transpersonal psychotherapist, and founder of the East Institute. Welcome to Medicine Wisdom, a radio talk show that will teach you to journey inward, and that journeying inward is your highest calling, that you have the power to heal yourself, that you embody your power and purpose, and that is your medicine. The medicine that flows through you and is the gift that we share with the world. I'm so deeply honored and grateful for our guest today, Hellll Vora, MD, who is a board certified psychiatrist, acupuncturist, and yoga teacher. She is the author of the best-selling book, The Anatomy of Anxiety. She's a functional medicine approach to mental health and really embodies that wisdom, considering the whole person and addressing imbalance at the root. Dr. Vora received her BA from Yale University and her MD from Columbia University. And as I was sitting with my connection and beautiful relationship with Hellll, I remembered, Hellll, that we first met at the Mind Body Green conference, Revitalize, some years back in the beautiful Arizona desert. And we were just talking before the show started, and it really was this vortex of interconnection of so many incredible souls and people on this path, bringing different forms of healing, wellness, and wisdom to the world. And I just so honored to have you and so excited to dive into our conversation today.
Lena, it's an honor to be here. I'm also so excited.
Beautiful. So I want to begin and just dive right into your journey and your story, because I really see the way that you practice psychiatry and the way that you embody your purpose and your work in the world is really revolutionizing the way we look at mental health and that we approach mental health, which is something that's really near and dear to my heart as a psychotherapist. And so for you, what were some of those catalyst moments on your heroic human journey that perhaps guided you into this more holistic and revolutionary way of practicing?
I'm always trying to think about how is my story potentially helpful for somebody who's listening or suffering or is kind of looking for reason for hope. And I think there's two critical junctures in my path. My path was, of course, a messy trajectory. Right? It doesn't make sense. But I think about two critical moments that have really shaped how I think about health and mental well-being. And one was when I was in my 20s and I was really out of balance. I had autoimmune markers in my blood work. I was chronically constipated, had polycystic ovary syndrome, acne, joint pains, ocular migraines. I couldn't focus. I was depressed. There was a lot going on. And I didn't know better than to just go the conventional route, seek care with my primary care doc, and honestly, often with my OBGYN, because that was the person I was in the habit of seeing. And there was a moment when I was saying, I tried to go off the pill because I suspected it was making me depressed. In retrospect, it absolutely was. And I went off of it, but then for 6 months, I didn't get my period. And I remember going back to the gynecologist and saying, okay, so what's going on here? What's the problem? What's the solution? And I thought to myself, I am the product of about 500 generations of reproductive success. Why did it stop with me? Something's not quite right here. And she said, oh, you have PCOS, you'll probably need to use IVF if and when you want to have a baby down the road. And anyway, we're just going to put you back on the pill and then you'll get your period again. And I did in that moment realize that that was not a root cause solution. I understood without the language for it. I wasn't a functional medicine doctor yet, but I didn't have the language, but I sensed that seems like a Band-Aid, because then what if I want to get off the pill again in the future? I'll be right back where I started. That was a critical juncture where I started to understand we're thinking about health in the wrong way. We are doing symptom suppression rather than root cause resolution. And I
Mhm.
think the next critical juncture was when I was doing my yoga teacher training in Bali. And that was the one where I really came home to my intuition and was able to drop my self loathing misogyny and
Mm.
stop performing being rigorous and objective. And I was really trying to win in the boys' club. And
Mm.
I understood what was valued there. And so I was molding myself into those traits, being objective, being rational, being good at math and science, and being not too emotional or too sensitive, and certainly not looking to my intuition as a compass. And it was in Bali that I started to say, actually, I'm a witch, and I'm happy about that. So that's really been the journey. And since Bali, it's really been a beautiful awakening to the magic in this world and to spirituality.
Mm. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I truly believe, it's in our own moments of being broken open and our own spiritual journey, whether, we want to call it spiritual or not, inherently it is, um, where, our clarity and our purpose and really why our soul is here, that begins to come to the forefront. It's interesting you mentioned Bali because that is a very formative place for me. I was, when I went to guide a retreat, meditation retreat in Bali, I was at the same time going through a whole disintegration of this marriage that, was beautiful on the outside, but really emotionally bankrupt on the inside. And so um, your share really took me back to that moment. And I really appreciate you, continuing to be, courageous and willing to share these ways of healing and really tuning inward to both, the physical wellness aspect of what so many people are attempting to seek and to embody, but also that spiritual aspect. And the question that's coming through, Ellen, now is, can you speak to that intersection as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, with a foot in the medical space and a foot in the spiritual space? How do you embody that intersection?
Hmm. It's so fun too. It does feel a little bit like it's not what I was trained to do. That we are very squeamish about spirituality in conventional medicine, in psychiatry. That's not our purview. And so if, at first it felt like I don't belong wading into those waters with my patients. But over time, I realized that I was doing my patients a disservice by not at least opening up that line of inquiry, giving people permission to seek and ask those questions, giving them permission to give themselves permission to do that.
Mhm.
I think that what I've come to realize, we're really taught that mental health is high tech, that it's the stuff of, somebody needs to have a lab coat, they need letters at the end of their name, they need to understand neuroscience and neurotransmitters and brain chemistry, and then they prescribe medication, and that's how you support your mental health. And it's completely bananas. And in many ways, mental health is quite low tech, but
Mhm.
we're really far from the set of inputs and the conditions that create mental well being.
Mhm.
Spirituality is part of that foundation. I think that how we feed ourselves, how we're sleeping, if we're moving our bodies, do we have connection to community, to nature? This is all part of how we feel well. Are we being of service, making a contribution, have a sense of meaning and purpose? But spirituality is a critical leg of that stool. And by overlooking it, I was leaving my patients, only partially ever feeling whole or thriving. And so I think the intersection is exactly where we need to be, ushering in a new understanding of mental health.
So right. I agree with that. And it just really lands as you say it. In that discussion and in the exploration, Ellen, of really showing and opening the path to allow others to see that, I love your verbiage around high tech and low tech. It's really low tech, right? How do you begin to um, speak to your patients to open them into that spiritual space? Again, whether we call it spiritual or not, um, and what does that look like for you in your practice as you're working with patients who perhaps in the past are used to going to a psychiatrist who's prescribing medication and they're on that medication for, an amount of time, who knows how long, years and years. But how does that look in your practice?
Oh, so it really varies person to person, but
Sure.
probably
Yeah.
the way I approach it initially with a patient is, let's say there's some unfolding of events in their life, which I can't help but spin meaning from. It feels like a learning, it feels like it's here for their growth. And so I'll usually frame it as, I don't know about your worldview, but my worldview is I see this as, this is here as a teacher, or this is here as a guide, or this is towards your highest and greatest. And some people really bristle at that. And so I learned to slow play it. And also, I've learned to not be dogmatic about this. Like I'm not here representing any particular worldview. I just want my patients to feel well and to thrive. So if it's really not their truth to make meaning of the events in their lives, then I'm not here to push that on them. I'm here really to learn from them and the fact that they don't see it that way, because that's different from my own perspective. But for many of my patients, some of them, it's like, oh, so I can make meaning of this. I can find comfort in the synchronicities. This can feel like guidance. This can feel like a benevolent force. This can feel like divine timing. And I find that that gives people immense amounts of comfort. And some of my patients actually feel like, thank God I can talk about this with you, because this
Mm,
is usually my private experience, but I don't feel like I could talk about this in a medical setting. And that's always a really nice feeling, just to give somebody a safe space to fully express themselves.
That safe, sacred space and allowing them to be seen, right, in their experience without imposing, right, a viewpoint, but it's that holding space for exploration. What a gift. And, the fact that you're practicing in that way, like in my mind, more and more doctors and practitioners in the medical field should be practicing in this way to hold that space for their patients' wholeness, which again, there's so many different access points into healing and transformation. But at the core, I feel that's such a vital piece of it, coming back to wholeness, returning to wholeness. And again, so many people access that journey, the health journey, the spiritual journey through their pain and through their suffering and through the imbalance. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned that benevolent force, and we can call it so many things, divine energy, God. So that brings us into, the conversation around psychedelics and how psychedelics in this time, it's really coming to the forefront. There's more and more science coming out to share about the efficacy of these medicines, plant medicines, in our mental health treatment. And I know, you've been very open in your book, Anatomy of Anxiety, and through different interviews around your that this is something that you also advocate for when it's in alignment with the patient. So can you share more about how that lands in your practice, maybe personally, some of your experiences and how they've impacted your own healing?
We're at such an incredibly interesting time. We're alive through something really cosmic. And
Yes.
I mean, I ascribe a lot of personification even to these plants. And I think their timing is impeccable. That
Yes.
right now, with the pandemic, with AI, with the fact that the mental health field is in crisis and so many people are struggling with depression, anxiety, bipolar, ADHD, and we're maybe beginning to culturally feel a little bit apprehensive around certain aspects of pharma And so here we are. And even if it's not apprehension, some people are feeling like, well, this hasn't adequately supported my mental health. So we're seeking a new way. And psychedelics are such a promising new line of how we approach mental health. But it works on the one hand in a way that echoes what we're already doing. It's active in the serotonin receptors and with the increase in neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, increased neuroconnectivity. There's so much that rhymes with what we've already been trying to do in mental health. But what makes me most excited is things like the mystical experience hypothesis, where we recognize that the degree to which you have a peak mystical experience in a psychedelic ceremony, that correlates with the antidepressant effect. We're not talking about antidepressants here. That's not the same story as Lexapro or Zoloft. This is fundamentally different. And I really like how my colleague Will Su describes it. He says psychedelics are not just tools for healing trauma, they are agents for making spirituality palatable to our starving Western world.
Mm. Mm. I hope the listeners really took that in, because that it touches me so deeply because this is the interconnectedness, right? These medicines bring us back to the multidimensionality of who we are at our core that we've simply forgotten. And our perceptions can be so clouded through our trauma responses, through our egoic defenses, through the stories and conditioning that we carry. And so Will Sue, shares that truth so eloquently. And thank you for bringing that into the forefront of how these mystical experiences can truly correlate and heal depressive symptoms. And ultimately, what we see so much, so often in our work here at the East Institute is that it's possible for that depression to heal. That we don't have to be in symptom reduction our whole lives, and that this is possible. And I have chills through my entire body, but just thank you for bringing that into the forefront.
To me, that feels like one of the most important messages I'm here to spread is that we have been taught a system for understanding mental health based on this idea that our mental health issues are the results of a genetic chemical imbalance.
Right.
And it means it's our destiny. It's a fixed trait. We're broken, but hey, there's a medication that fixes that. But then if the medication doesn't fix it for you, you feel a sense of despair and you think, okay, I'm really screwed. And I think it's so important that we get to the truth on this, which is that our mental health is determined by more than our genes. They were only ever a predisposition. It connects to our nutrition, how inflamed we are, how our digestive tract is functioning, our hormones, how we're sleeping, exercising, but also the psychospiritual dimensions like our connection to community and nature and a sense of meaning and purpose and being of service. And all of this is to say there's always hope. There's so much that we can do to support our mental health, and we're never stuck. There's always a reason to believe that there's a path up that mountain for healing. And I think that there's many people right now going through life feeling that this is just who they are and who they always will be. And there's a lot of despair out there. And I want to scream from the rooftops, there's no reason for despair. There's always reason for hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that perception shift in itself creates an opening for people to move down a path that perhaps they wouldn't have before. And even that, I see that perception shift too, seeing so many clients come through. What we offer, like our flagship healing program, is modalities that are combined to create a sustained healing trajectory. So it's transpersonal psychology, mindfulness and meditation, neuroscience, vibrational sound therapy, shamanic healing, energy medicine, and the plant medicine itself. And so what we've seen is that that hope, even in sharing that there's this different path that does honor both the indigenous traditional ancient medicines and also the modern neuroscience, that even in the first couple of sessions, the symptom reduction is there because they're believing, right, that there's a different way. So I appreciate you, really speaking to that. And curious too, as you've sat with so many patients and maybe some who have decided to move down the psychedelic healing journey, that road, what is your perspective around natural, like, plant medicines like ayahuasca, um, psilocybin, straight from the earth, and then also more, there's the synthetic medicines of ketamine, synthetic psilocybin. Is, as a doctor and practitioner psychiatrist, do you have perspective on those various routes that one can take?
Yeah, I think that there are most promising new line of treatments in mental health, and it feels almost to trivialize it to even call it a treatment, but that's the framing of our system. And I think that I have in my patient panel, it's always a matter of timing and discretion, sort of to be judicious about who and when and which medicine. But I think of myself like a quarterback matchmaking. When is it the right time for somebody to embark upon a journey with these medications, and then with, or not medications, these medicines, and then which one? And so it's unlocked immense amounts of transformation and healing for my patients. And I'll be very medical legally, but also just it's my truth is to say, I don't think it's always the right path forward. I think it's not always indicated. Sometimes it's contraindicated. I think
Right.
a lot about whether somebody's brain is more tending towards chaos or tending towards rigidity. And I think shaking up the snow globe, as it happens in ceremony, is a wonderful agent of healing when there's rigidity, when we're entrenched and stuck in certain patterns. But if things are already in a state of chaos or immense instability, I think it's actually not the right time to shake up the snow globe. Then I'm
Right.
really trying to ground someone for a long time before that might be the right strategy. But I do recommend these for my patients, and it just depends on the person and what they're coming to it with, what contraindications they might have, what other medications they might be taking. That helps me determine what's the right first step.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, with the emergence of these medicines, again, more accessibility, more decriminalization, more at the forefront, there's also, I feel, this responsibility from practitioners, facilitators, that there's guidance around what is contraindicated. And there are many people who want to do this work, but perhaps don't have that sturdy, grounded, sacred container yet, where they can actually hold that entropy and the chaos that this work can create. And so I think that's I just feel so deeply about this point, in that that is the responsibility of those who are either advocating for this deeper healing work or facilitating this work, that not everyone's a great candidate. And that's just objective truth from my perspective. And it's important that there's like that risk and harm reduction piece.
That's right. I think harm reduction is a focus. I also think that integration is really something we need to be talking a lot about. That's what's beautiful about the work that you do, and you bring in transpersonal psychotherapy and a really good structure and container for how do we integrate the work. Because I have a lot of patients who they'll go and they'll have the big experience.
Yeah.
And then what? If they
Right.
don't integrate it, galvanize it, come back to it, we kind of come back to it in therapy in an ongoing way, it's lost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's in ourselves. It does shift us forever. But to really start to move the needle in how we're showing up on a day to day basis, I find we need to keep coming back to it. We need to remind ourselves of the lessons, because they're the lessons we need because they don't come necessarily all that easily. And I think that that's part of why we need to keep coming back to it in integration therapy.
So important. I mean, it's a non-negotiable here, the work that we do, but there's a lot of medicine work out there that doesn't include integration, and there are ways I think we can continue to educate people as to how to do their own integration and really embody those tools, and how to come back to that reprogramming of the default mode network, for example, on a day-to-day basis. Because we say all the time, you know, the medicine shows us perhaps what we need to know or the insights and helps us heal, but the work really is, our responsibility, and it's illuminating the power that exists within us versus us giving our power away to this plant or this medicine, like just heal me, just heal me, and that piece, I want to dive more deeply into that too, because there can be this power dynamic, and a lot of times it's subconscious because of the desperation of people coming in and the level of suffering. So what would you say around that in terms of the empowering piece of working with these medicines as a tool versus giving your power away?
Well, we've been taught that, right? But that's how healing happens. That's how spirituality happens. It's always in a construct where usually some authority figure, some father figure has the power, has the say, and we hand over our power, and that's how things get done. And I think that I've always thought about it as perfect medicine, often imperfect facilitation, but it's really there as a teacher, and it's kind of a dialogue between us and the divine teacher. I think facilitators have a massive sacred role in holding a safe container, but it's really kind of a work that we do one-on-one with the medicine, and in the container of our own hearts. And so I think that the medicine, I think, kind of starts to teach us that lesson, that this isn't something that happens top down.
Right.
And we have a little grassroots learning experience for ourselves.
Yes. Yes. Really believe that. The opening of working with it, co-creating with the medicine, in those deeper ceremonial or healing spaces. And you're right. I feel the medicine teaches us that in really interesting, symbolic, and nuanced ways, sometimes not so nuanced, sometimes very overt ways. And yeah, that piece I think is important. Just that everyone has we all have agency as we're working with the medicine. And that is just incredibly important to remember. So uh, we're going to go on a short break. We're going to dive back in with Ellen here shortly. When we come back from a short break, we'll be talking all about psychedelics and how we can continue to utilize these medicines and our own journey of spiritual healing and awakening for collective healing for humanity and the planet. You won't want to miss it. Be right back. Welcome back to Medicine Wisdom. We're here with the incredible Ellen Vora, psychiatrist and author of The Anatomy of Anxiety. And so we've been diving into the really deep and potent topics of psychedelic medicines and how they can truly play a role in individual and collective healing, especially from standpoint of treating mental health imbalances. And so, Ellen, as you really sit in your own journey, and I know you shared some in your book about some of your own experiences. How do you see the interconnection of working with individual patients and allowing these medicines to work with us on an individual basis? How does that relate to why the heck we're here as this soul in human form on this particular planet?
There was an episode of your show that I was listening to with somebody named Tom. Was it
Tom Blue
Blue
Wolf.
Wolf?
Yes.
And that was a magnificent episode. And he brought up something. I'll paraphrase him slightly, but it was basically every time we try to isolate things, what do you know? We discover everything is interconnected. And it really, like, I mean, this is a concept I think about all the time. I'm always thinking about the fact that I was trained in Western medicine to think about the body as separate, discrete organ systems. And yet, in Eastern modalities, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, it's always been appreciated that everything is interconnected. And there's a line in my book, even your gut and your brain are talking to each other, even if your psychiatrist and your gastroenterologist are not. And I feel like this is, one of the fallacies of Western medicine. But it occurred to me when listening to him describe this that, of course, this is also how we collectively heal. I think that when I'm working with individual patients, it feels like part of this greater web. I'm here with a particular mission, a particular contribution to carry out. And every patient who I work with, there's something there for me to learn. And it helps inform and shape my ideas and my perspectives that I can then put out into a book or into some kind of, talk or whatever it is to spread this message on a wider level. It's just a beautiful web with all these little sparkling intersections. And I think that we really are in this moment. I think the plants have done a really brilliant job of their timing is impeccable, and they've really realized that this is the moment when we're poised to be ready for this shift, and not too quickly, but just at the right timing. And so I think that this has everything to do with how we heal as a collective, and to recognize there is no separate kidney, separate heart, separate lung, that it's all beautifully connected. Everything impacts everything else.
Oh, yes. It reminds me of the quote, I'm going to paraphrase as well, from one of my dear teachers, Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, that, you know, the whole cosmos exists within, one cell of our body. And we can actually remember that. I don't know, it feels like when we come into our own individual healing, it feels so much more expansive, even though we may be initially just focusing on ourselves, that there's this greater purpose. And I know purpose is very much correlated with other, embodied emotional energies like awe, like motivation, passion, that we can feel this purpose on our own individual healing path and see that web. And so, we do so much work here around working with the ego, which is, endlessly fascinating and entertaining. We call the ego the coyote, the trickster, from indigenous cultures, called the trickster, because it can manifest in all these different, really seductive ways, the stories that flow through our minds. So, I'm sensing that when you work with folks, you're seeing that web, and then the continuation of that in question form is, how do you hold space for someone to see their individual healing journey as an interconnected web, one that Tom Blue Wolf was talking about?
I think that there are really obvious ways, and then, with certain patients, it's really obvious, and other times it's much more subtle. But I think about how I have a lot of patients who carry a lot of trauma, and they want to heal initially for their own comfort and relief from symptoms.
Right.
But then often what you discover is that as they heal, they shift into a role that's sometimes altruistic, it's sometimes in service, but they basically step into a role where they're healing others. And sometimes that's very explicit and overt. I've had patients become therapists or become health coaches or life coaches or medicine facilitators. And other times it is subtler, but you'll see the way somebody has a shift where maybe they come from a very chaotic family system and they finally find their through line to forgiveness, compassion, understanding. And somehow with that shift, everyone in the family system has a softening. Everyone feels a little bit more seen, a little less misunderstood, and there's just a shift. And I'm not here to say it's all honky dory and rainbows. Like, it doesn't just work like that. You said
Right.
the ego is endlessly fascinating. It's also endless, it's endless work.
Yes.
And so it's not like we snap our fingers and it's solved. But I do believe that as we have these shifts, which usually is in the direction toward more compassion, more understanding, more love, and for me, actually, magic, like to believe in magic, which sounds so silly, but is in many ways this guiding principle that brings us comfort and helps us show up with right action because we can trust and we can surrender to what's occurring here. That shift ends up having ramifications in every direction.
Yes. So for you, how have your own experiences with plant medicine allowed you to believe in magic, that truth of magic?
It's everything. And I did start to believe in magic. And, I feel it's the ego actually that makes me have to laugh when I say that,
Uh-huh.
and the off chance that someone from my high school tunes in and is like, what is Ellen Vora talking about? So the ego shows up and laughs at it, but I actually wholeheartedly just feel it and believe it. So I'll put the laughing aside. I think that I started to in Bali, as I mentioned, and there was a woman there that really helped me own my own magic and my own witchiness and intuition. Her name was Daniela. And um, that's where I started to see it. But then a few years later was when I started to work with psychedelics, and it really helped. It corroborated it, but it also lined up timing wise with when I lost my mom, which I think is something we share.
Yes.
And so that was a crisis of, I had this burgeoning worldview that maybe there's divine order, that maybe there's something here I can trust and surrender to. And then, of course, to have that massive loss and that grieving process, I felt at the same time the most skeptical and doubting of my worldview, but also the most urgency of, I need this now more than ever. And so it really it kind of necessitated that I really doubled down on it. And through that, I was able to connect to my mom in spirit form. I continue to. And so it gave me the opportunity to really have so many things to point to when I need a reminder, when I lose my faith, when I feel like maybe this is a senseless and cold universe. That's usually when it comes in with some sign or some guidance that helps me not forget that this is real.
Mm, yes. Nothing like those soul contracts that we've had, the ones that we love so dearly to remind us. And especially in working with the sacred plants, I too really relishing in this connection that we have. Because, mother loss, of course, everyone has their own experience of it. But there's this really, I would say, powerful opening that can bring into a further embodiment of that feminine lineage that happens. And I've done a lot of ancestral work and soul work with my mom in ceremony, and that's possible to connect with the unseen world and the magic of the energetic multidimensionality of existence and other souls. And the remembrance is so helpful. I feel like it gives us this sustenance to continue on because, of course, as humans, we're perpetually forgetful. So that's what's coming through as I'm sitting with what you shared. It's okay, remembering again and again and again of the magic.
Yeah. And I like that word sustenance. It sustains us, it nourishes us. And, I think that every painful loss also means that we have an even more vital connection to the spirit world.
Mhm. As you've again continued to straddle that line of medicine and the scene and the earth plane and also the spirit world. What are those primary factors that you see in this work specifically, healing holistically or healing through psychedelic treatments or ceremonies? What are those factors that come through in that form of healing that directly dictate or correlate with someone actually healing or getting better? Talked about the mystical experience effect. I can't remember exactly the term, but that is one of the primary factors. What else? What else are you seeing from your perspective actually facilitates that healing process?
Yeah, so many different things. I mean, one relates to what we talked about earlier with the interconnectedness of everything. When we get that opportunity to have a quieter default mode network, it seems to dissolve that narrow sense of the self that we carry. And it's somewhat of an adaptation to get through our lives. But when we dissolve that and we have an opportunity to feel interconnected with everything, um, I mean, that's what the world needs right now, is to not see, if I see myself as the digestive tract and my neighbor as the brain, if we were thinking of ourselves as discrete islands and separate, well, it's just fundamental, it's just patently false. And we are interconnected. And I think that sometimes that adaptive need to go through life in the material world with an ego and a sense of separateness, it helps us feed ourselves, but it sometimes pits us against our neighbor. And so to have that dissolve and feel our interconnection creates a pathway for more love, more forgiveness, more compassion, and, and just recognizing how much everything we do and how we show up, how much it matters. And I think that what I see with trauma in particular, it's a little different for everyone. Sometimes, like with ketamine, it's almost like this, because it's a dissociative, there's a cooling down of the stress response that usually mobilizes anytime we access traumatic memories. So you can never really move through it. But to cool down that response allows you to, with a cool head, move through it and kind of rearrange some pieces. There's a colleague of mine named Britt Frank. She has a book called The Science of Stuck. She talks about trauma as brain indigestion, almost like it was too much and the brain couldn't handle it. And it kind of got shoved in places in a disorganized way. And then we carry that clutter, we carry that disarray in our brain. And so when you can come and access it through a psychedelic ceremony, sometimes you can clean out that closet and get things back into a state of organization. MDMA works in almost an even different way. Jason Silva had a line about this where it's almost like it creates reverse PTSD. Rather than feeling in a moment of overwhelm that this is a cold and senseless world, it's a feeling of this is a loving world and that we ourselves are loving and compassionate beings. And to just have that empathogenic color or hue over difficult memories, it really softens a lot of the hardness around our heart when it comes to the difficult things we've been through.
Yes, that I'm having this image of like the dense energy getting pushed out as the light energy is coming through, which I know that's part of what's happening very potently on our planet right now. But that also happens in our own bodies because, of course, as we've been talking about, we're not separate from. And then as we really acknowledge that that separation can happen within us and be disease and manifest as that. And also, we're seeing that in the ways that we witness societies and governments and war and conflict in the world. And so, I love the way that you described the effect of MDMA, the reverse trauma effect, and that heart opening, right? Because that's going back to something that you said, the remembrance of the truth, that this is why we're here. Love is why we're here. And really, our healing is to shift from the places of imbalance and fear and separation into that heart opening love. And I enjoyed hearing you speak to the different medicines because you're right, they can be helpful for different things. So when you sit with MDMA, let's say MDMA, psilocybin, and ayahuasca, for example, and ketamine as well, what are you seeing in terms of efficacy or who may be a better candidate, for one versus the other? What comes through as you sit with that? 'Cause I know that's a question we get a lot here at East.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not really so much a who as a when. And I
Yes.
think that um, it's the studies are so encouraging, and I love that. And I have so much appreciation for organizations like MAPS and the work being done at Johns Hopkins, UCLA, NYU, Yale, in London, the Imperial College of London, and so on and so forth. So much judicious research that helps us say, hey, this is a lot better than our current standard of care, especially with conditions like PTSD. But I think it's also arguably true with depression, though it's still a complicated story. What I see in my practice is that it's not a instant silver bullet. it's
No.
it's not at all that, but um, if somebody starts working with these medicines and doing the work around it, the integration work around it, the intention setting and preparation for it, then we get to a year or two or three later and we look back and we think that was a critical piece of this puzzle of why someone has arrived at a place of much more wholeness and well-being. And so it's not like we snap our fingers. We're not just correcting something in someone's brain chemistry, but the plants, I think, are divinely leading somebody on a path where there's growth and there's shifting and there's things getting back into alignment. I think about that a lot, where in the same way that someone might prepare for work with ayahuasca with the dieta and sort of prepare the body for that, one of my early ayahuasca ceremonies, I got a download from grandmother that was basically, okay, you go heal the bodies. And in a way, I think the work that I do is like a macrocosmic dieta. It's basically recognizing where are we getting vibrationally really dense and really out of balance. And in a sense, it's almost blocking us from receiving the healing of this work. And so I'm always identifying, where is it that processed foods or alcohol or our relationship to the phone, or even sometimes, and this one's more sensitive and controversial, but even sometimes our relationship to psychiatric medications, that is sometimes creating a vibration and a density that's blocking us from the healing that can come in.
Yes. I want to share with you as you were talking, because that feels very true for the work that you share. It's like I had this, image of like vines, like these plants moving through you, like you're a medicine woman in your own right in this, modern way, but bringing in such a beautifully integrated way the wisdom of our ancestors and of the planet, of Pachamama, that really, I really see that moving through you. And I appreciate you sharing the transmission from grandmother ayahuasca. She's so wise and helps us to see those parts of ourselves perhaps we're not always fully connected with. And yeah, like that returning to harmony of the earth and moving through that density. In part of my lineage is from Peru, and there's this term called Ayni, Ayni, which means sacred reciprocity. And they talk a lot about when illness is present or imbalance is present, it's where Ayni hasn't been fully realized within the person. And I love the way that my teachers from Peru talk about that. So I know we're nearing the end of this delicious episode that I've so enjoyed. I want to end with a question to you that I feel is at the core of all of this work and this discussion. Why do you think that we're here as these souls in human form?
I mean, The truth is, I don't know, but my thoughtful answer also is, I don't know. I recognize, like, I think about it constantly, but in the way we would say with research, data inconclusive, I think I literally have not yet accessed that truth. And so I feel like I'm still in a waiting space with that, which is a wonderful place to be. And it's a beautiful challenge to be in uncertainty in the gray area, because there's such a human tendency, and I have such a tendency to want to be like, pencils down, I get it.
Yes.
and I'm not there yet. I'm curious to hear what you think.
Love is what I think. Again, with the holding so much gray area with spaciousness, that love, to unlearn our way back to our truth of love. That there's something in that feels true to our purpose on this planet.
I think you're right. And in a way, part of the work I do with psychedelic medicines is take the things we kind of know are true, but have our own personal felt experience with it so that we get it, we grok it. And I've done a lot of work with these medicines, but I can tell I still have a ways to go before I fully, in every cell of my being, understand that it's all love. But I sort of know it's the answer to the test, but I'm living a take-home test where I'm trying to write that essay.
Such a good way to put it. So, Ellen, I would love for you to share how our listeners can connect with your incredible work.
Certainly on Instagram, I'm at Ellen Vora MD, and then my website is ellenvora.com. And through there is my newsletter where you can hear about when I'm opening up online groups.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So grateful for you. Really appreciate all that you share with the world.
Lena, so much appreciation and gratitude for you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And remember, to all of those listening, the world needs the gifts only you have. What is your medicine? Stay tuned for next week's episode with Allison Charles, shaman and author. Cannot wait to share her medicine with you. Have a beautiful week. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Medicine Wisdom. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. If you're interested in learning more about this week's guest, be sure to check out the show notes below for the links. And don't forget to follow me on both Instagram and TikTok at I am Lena Franklin. Join me every Wednesday on my YouTube channel for new episodes of Medicine Wisdom. Aho Munai.